My name is Megan Cole. I am 34 years old and I work as an environmental consultant in Nashville, Tennessee. 8 months ago, my father sold my grandfather's property in Pike County, Kentucky for $595,000. They split the money with my half brother Chad. They told me Grandpa Walt didn't leave a will. They told me there was nothing left for me. What they didn't check, what none of them thought to check, was what was underneath that land. Because my grandfather did leave a will, and in that will, he separated one thing from the property before he died: the mineral rights. He left them to me, only me. The geological survey came back at $4.9 million. Natural gas deposits and a rare mineral called gallium used in semiconductors, sitting right below the timber and cattle property my father thought he sold. Here is how a $595,000 betrayal turned into a $4.9 million inheritance. Welcome back to Lace and Ash. This is the channel where everyday people find the courage to stand up for what is theirs, not with anger, but with principle and proof. If you have ever been cut out by the people who were supposed to protect you, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. The property sat on the edge of the Appalachian foothills in Pike County, a two-lane county road winding through it on the east side. 220 acres of timber and cattle land, dark soil under a canopy of hardwoods that turned copper and amber every October, a creek fed by mountain runoff that ran cold and fast in spring and slowed to a murmur by August. A cattle fence that had been mended so many times it was half the original wire and half whatever Grandpa Walt had on hand that season. My grandfather, Walter Cole, built that place from nothing. He bought the first 60 acres in 1968 with money he saved working the mines in Letcher County. Added the rest over 4 decades of patient, deliberate accumulation. He never took a loan he didn't have to. He never cut timber he didn't need to sell. He said the land was a living account and he was just the steward. I spent every summer there from the time I was 5 until I left for the University of Kentucky at 18. Most kids from Nashville would have lasted 3 days. No neighbors visible from the porch, no signal on the ridge, nothing but ridge lines and tree canopy and the sound of the creek below the house. But Grandpa Walt made that land interesting. He would crouch down in the field near the south fence, pick up a handful of dark soil, and hold it out to me. See this, Megan girl. Most people look at dirt and see nothing. There is a whole world under here. When I was 8 years old, he gave me a soil testing kit, a simple one, the kind you could order from a farm supply catalog. Little vials and a color chart and a set of instructions written in a font almost too small to read. He sat with me for 2 whole afternoons while I tested every patch of the property I could reach. That kit was what made me want to do what I do now. Every time I bill a client for an environmental assessment, I think about those 2 afternoons. My half brother Chad played on his phone in the hay barn and complained about the mosquitoes. My father Dennis and his wife Sharon praised everything Chad did and found gentle reasons to end every conversation I started about the land, about the soil, about the creek chemistry. She is going to be a scientist, Grandpa Walt told my father once at Sunday dinner. My father chuckled. She is going to be impractical, he said. Grandpa Walt looked at me across the table and said nothing, just nodded once, the way he did when he had decided something. Grandpa Walt died on a Wednesday in February. By Saturday, Dennis and Sharon were already making phone calls. The funeral was on a Monday. 80 people in a small Baptist church in Pikeville, most of them wearing work boots. Many of them men Grandpa Walt had employed, traded with, or simply helped over 40 years in that county. I almost missed it. Sharon called me on Friday evening, 2 days before the service. I was on a field site outside Clarksville doing a pre-construction soil assessment for a highway project. She said she had meant to call sooner. She said things had been hectic. She said it the way someone mentions bad traffic, not the way someone reports the death of a patriarch. I drove through the night, caught a 5:45 flight out of Nashville, landed in Lexington, rented a car, and drove the 2+ hours into Pike County. I walked into the church 11 minutes after the service started. Sharon had not saved me a seat. After the burial, the family gathered at the property. I walked through the farmhouse while everyone else stood in the yard with paper plates of church food. Grandpa Walt's bedroom smelled like cedar and old wool and something I could not name that was just him. His desk was too clean. There was usually a small cedar box on the right corner. Dark wood, brass latch, barely bigger than a thick hardback book. He had kept it locked for as long as I could remember. The box was gone. I found Sharon in the kitchen. "Where is Grandpa's cedar box? The one that sits on his desk." She waved a hand without turning to look at me. "Just old junk." Dennis threw it out. I studied her face. She was looking at the wall about a foot past my left shoulder, chin slightly elevated. I had been watching that expression my whole life. It was the expression she wore when she had already decided the conversation was over. In the hallway, Chad brushed past me. "Don't be dramatic, Megan. Let people grieve." I did not respond. I let him go. "Let me tell you about the Cole family, because you need to understand the pattern before you can understand the betrayal. There were two children in the household I grew up adjacent to. Chad, Dennis's son from his marriage to Sharon, 2 years older than me, and me, Dennis's daughter from his first marriage, who lived primarily with my mother in Nashville. To Dennis and Sharon, Chad was the proof of the family they had built. He stayed in Kentucky after high school. He worked in the county. He married young, bought a truck, attended every family gathering without complaint. None of that required effort because nothing challenged him. I was the complication. I asked questions that made dinner uncomfortable. I applied for scholarships and grants without asking permission because I had learned early that asking permission was a way of inviting a no. I got into the University of Kentucky on a full academic scholarship. Dennis's response was a text message. Good news, I guess. Sharon's was more pointed. "Well, I hope Nashville is proud of you because your father and I certainly can't take credit for it." I had not asked them to. Dennis Cole signed whatever Sharon put in front of him. He always had. He was a man who had confused conflict avoidance with virtue for so many decades he no longer knew the difference. He sat in his recliner and watched weather reports and let Sharon manage everything. I used to call the farm number when I was in college, the landline Grandpa Walt had installed himself. Half the time, Sharon answered and spent 30 seconds telling me about Chad's job or Chad's truck or Chad's new house before saying she had to go. "You left, Megan," Dennis said to me once, and the sentence landed like a gavel. You left. Chad stayed. It was his explanation for everything, a single sentence delivered with the calm conviction of a man who believed it fully. I did not know yet what they were planning, but looking back, the signals were obvious. 3 weeks after the funeral, my phone rang at 8 in the morning. Dennis never accounted for the time difference from Pike County to Nashville, even though it was the same zone. "Megan, I need to tell you something about your grandfather's estate." I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen counter. "Okay, Dad. Your grandfather didn't leave a will, Megan. There's nothing for you." He said it evenly, reading from something I thought. "The property is going to be sold. Sharon and I need the money. The roof on the main barn has been failing for 2 seasons, and we don't have the cash to replace it. Chad needs the money. His contracting business has been underwater for a year, and he has a family to think about. You have your career in Nashville. You're going to be fine." I looked at the wall of my apartment, a framed topographic map of Middle Tennessee, a bookshelf lined with field guides and EPA compliance manuals and the kind of technical literature that nobody else in my family had ever opened, the life I had built without 1 cent from any of them. "Shouldn't we all be part of this conversation?" I said. "We are both Grandpa's grandchildren. The property was his whole life. There's nothing to discuss. You're not here. You haven't been here in years." I pressed my thumb into the edge of the counter until it went white at the tip, not from anger exactly. From a very specific kind of recognition, the feeling a field scientist gets when the data on the surface doesn't match the known geology underneath. My grandfather was a meticulous man. He kept a ledger for every head of cattle he had ever owned going back to 1972. He kept his property tax receipts in a steel lockbox sorted by year. He renewed his property insurance every January without fail and kept the documents in a labeled folder in the top drawer of his desk. A man like that does not die without a will. "Okay, Dad," I said. "Thank you for letting me know." I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for 40 minutes without moving. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the Pike County Public Property Records portal. It took me 9 minutes. 220 acres, Pike County, Kentucky. Timber and cattle property, farmhouse, outbuildings, creek frontage, listed at $595,000. The listing had been active for 8 days. I pulled comparable sales for Pike County agricultural land. 200 acres of timber and cattle property in that region, depending on road access and improvements, was running between 800 and 850,000. Dennis and Sharon had priced it nearly 230,000 below market value. They wanted it sold fast. Before anyone thought to look closer, I called Chad. Did Grandpa really not leave a will? His voice went flat. That's what Dad said. Why do you always have to make everything complicated, Megan? I'm asking a question. Dad handled it. Talk to him if you've got a problem. He hung up. I went back to the listing. I read through the property details twice, looking at the structure of the language. And then something in the fine print caught my eye. 2 words, small type, tucked under the property details section almost as a footnote. Surface rights only. I read those 2 words 3 times, then a fourth. Then I leaned back and stared at the ceiling of my apartment. In my line of work, surface rights only carries a very specific meaning. It means someone at some point severed the mineral rights from the surface rights. Whoever buys that property gets the farmhouse, the outbuildings, the timber, the cattle pasture, the creek frontage. They get everything visible. They do not get a single cubic foot of what is underground. Dennis texted me that evening. Your mother, he meant Sharon, told me you called Chad with questions. Let it go, Megan. You left. Chad stayed. That's just how things are. I did not reply. I was already reading Kentucky mineral law. The next morning, I pulled the Pike County probate court filings. $8 through the online portal, 4.5 minutes to download. Affidavit of heirship filed by Dennis A. Cole and Sharon M. Cole 15 days after my grandfather's death. The document stated 3 things. 1. Walter James Cole died intestate without a valid will. 2. The sole heirs were Dennis Cole as surviving son and his 2 grandchildren, Chad Cole and Megan Cole. 3. Megan Cole had voluntarily relinquished her claim to the estate. I read that third point 7 times. My name, my supposed relinquishment on a legal document I had never seen, never signed, never been consulted about, voluntarily relinquished. I called my colleague Priya Shah. She worked 3 desks from mine in our Nashville office and had a master's degree in environmental science with a secondary concentration in regulatory compliance and land law. Priya, hypothetical question. If someone files a false affidavit of heirship with a Kentucky probate court, claims a person died without a will when a will exists, claims a specific heir relinquished her rights when she never did, what are the legal consequences? Priya was quiet for 4 seconds. That's fraud, Megan. That is a felony. Even between family members, especially between family members, a probate court doesn't look kindly on false sworn filings. The person who signed it has serious exposure. I thanked her and hung up. I did not tell her it was not hypothetical. I did not call Dennis. I did not call Sharon. I did not call Chad. I did not send a single text, because confronting them now would give them time to coordinate, to contact an attorney, to build a defense. I needed to find the one person who would know whether my grandfather had left a will. And I had a strong suspicion who that was. When I was 16, Grandpa Walt mentioned a lawyer, not the attorney in Pikeville who handled the property tax appeals and the cattle lease agreements, a different one, in a different town. My lawyer, he had said, not the family's. I can still hear the exact way he emphasized that distinction. My lawyer. I remembered the town he mentioned because it struck me as slightly incongruous. Prestonsburg. 30 miles from the property, over in Floyd County. The kind of town where a man from Pike County could keep a document filed without his family in Pikeville knowing about it. I searched James Burkett Attorney, Prestonsburg, Kentucky. Second result. Burkett Estate and Mineral Law. Single attorney office on Court Street. Phone number listed. I called at 9:15 in the morning. A woman answered, measured and warm. Burkett Law, this is Helen. My name is Megan Cole. I believe Mr. Burkett may have been my grandfather's attorney. Walter Cole. 3 seconds of silence, and then, oh, sweetheart, he has been trying to reach you for 4 months. My hands went cold. 4 months. He sent a certified letter to the farm address 2 weeks after the funeral, she said. It came back marked, "Return to sender." He called the farm's landline. A woman answered, said you had no interest in estate matters, and asked him not to call again. My stepmother. Sharon intercepted the letter. Sharon told this attorney to stop calling. Helen put me through to James Burkett. His voice was unhurried, the measured calm of a man who had been practicing estate and mineral law for 30-plus years in eastern Kentucky and had long since stopped being surprised by anything families did to one another. "Miss Cole, your grandfather left a will, and he left very specific provisions in it with regard to you. I think you need to come to my office. How soon can you get to Kentucky?" I booked the first flight I could find. If you have ever had that moment, that particular phone call that reorganizes everything you thought you understood about your own history, you know exactly what I felt sitting on the edge of my kitchen chair with the phone still warm in my hand. If this story is hitting close to home, take a second to subscribe to Lace and Ash and drop a comment below. This channel exists for exactly this kind of story. Now let me tell you what was inside that cedar box. I landed in Lexington at 1:45 in the afternoon and drove east on the Mountain Parkway. The landscape changed as I got deeper into eastern Kentucky, the flat central bluegrass giving way to ridgelines and hollows, the highway cutting through hillsides of exposed sandstone. Somewhere past the Burt Combs Mountain Parkway marker, I caught myself gripping the steering wheel harder than I needed to. I loosened my hands and pressed them flat on my thighs at the next red light. This was not about emotion. This was about documentation. I am an environmental consultant. I have spent 11 years assessing what is underground based on what I observe at the surface. I am trained to hold conclusions until the data is complete and verified. So I ran through the facts the way I would run through a site assessment, layer by layer. Fact 1. My grandfather kept records with the precision of a CPA. He did not die without a will. Fact 2. My father and stepmother filed a sworn document claiming he did. They swore I had relinquished rights I had never been asked about. Fact 3. The property listing said surface rights only. In Kentucky, as in most mineral states, that phrasing means a prior severance of mineral estate from surface estate. Fact 4. An attorney in Prestonsburg had been trying to reach me for 4 months. My stepmother intercepted his mail and told him not to call back. The subsurface data does not match the surface presentation. Someone buried something here. I turned off the Mountain Parkway and came into Prestonsburg on the 2-lane through town. The Big Sandy River ran alongside the road, brown and wide from the spring runoff. I pulled into the parking lot behind Burkett's office on Court Street at 3:50. While I was locking the car, my phone rang. The number on the screen was the farm's landline. The same number I had called from campus phones and field sites for a dozen years. Sharon answered half the time I dialed it. I picked up. "Megan, it's your dad." His voice was lighter than I expected, performatively easy, the register he used when he wanted something to feel simpler than it was. "Just wanted to let you know. The property closed yesterday. $595, right at the listing price. Sharon and I are putting our share towards something we have been looking at for a while. A place on Dewey Lake. Just a small cabin, but it's ours. Chad is using his portion to stabilize the business and get a little breathing room. It is such a relief to have all of this wrapped up." He paused just a half beat longer than he needed to, waiting. "That sounds great, Dad." "It really is." I was sitting in a rental car on Court Street in Prestonsburg, Kentucky, 40 yards from the office of my grandfather's attorney, holding a phone connected to a man who had just sold a property built on a false sworn document. "I am really glad for you both," I said. "Truly." He did not hear the steadiness in my voice. He took it for agreement. "Good," he said. "Sharon will be glad to hear that. Talk soon." He hung up before I replied. I sat in the car for 1 full minute, window down, listening to the river. Then I walked into James Burkett's office. The office had the particular gravity of rooms where consequential things happen quietly. Dark wood bookshelves from floor to ceiling, case files in labeled manila folders stacked along the credenza, a window that looked out onto Court Street and let in the low afternoon light at an angle that made the dust in the air visible. The floor creaked under the rug. James Burkett stood up from behind his desk when I came in. He was late 60s probably, white hair cut close, a handshake that communicated years of mineral lease negotiations and estate settlements in one of the more legally complicated counties in the state. He wore a dark jacket that had been pressed recently. Miss Cole, please sit down. Please. I want to apologize to you. For what? For not doing more to find you. He settled back into his chair. I sent a certified letter to the farm address within 2 weeks of your grandfather's passing. It came back returned to sender. I called the property's landline. A woman, I assume your stepmother, told me you had no interest in estate matters and asked that I not call again. I should have pushed harder. Your grandfather was my client for 24 years. He retained me specifically because he wanted an attorney in a different county, away from the Pikeville attorneys that family members and neighbors used. He was deliberate about that. I sat across from him. The leather chair was worn soft. Mr. Burkett, did my grandfather leave a will? He looked at me with the patience of a man who has spent decades delivering answers people did not know they needed. He did, Miss Cole. He updated it 22 months before he passed, and he left very specific provisions regarding you. He reached behind his desk and lifted a small cedar box onto the surface between us. I recognized it immediately. Dark wood, brass latch, the same box that had lived on the right corner of Grandpa Walt's desk for as long as I had been visiting that farmhouse. The box, Sharon had told me Dennis threw out. James set it on the desk. Your grandfather brought this to me himself in January, about a year before he died. He drove over from Pike County alone. He was 81 years old, still driving that old Silverado. He said to keep it until the time came. I reached forward and opened the latch. The smell hit me before I saw anything. Cedar and old wool and something else. Faint and familiar. The same scent that had been in Grandpa Walt's bedroom since I was a child, concentrated now into a box the size of a Bible. Inside were 3 items. A will, 9 pages, notarized, dated November 8th, 2023. A mineral deed, 3 pages, also notarized, same date. And a handwritten note on a piece of lined paper torn from a yellow legal pad, folded once. James let me read in silence. The will was methodical, the way Grandpa Walt did everything. He left the surface property, the farmhouse, the outbuildings, the timber acreage, and the cattle pasture to his heirs equally. That meant Dennis, and through Dennis, Chad, and me. But the mineral deed was separate, filed with the Pike County Clerk on November 8th, 2023, 14 months before my grandfather died. It transferred all mineral rights, all subsurface rights, and all extraction rights beneath the 220 acres to one person. Megan Ruth Cole. Me. Only me. I looked up at James Burkett. He nodded. Your grandfather severed the mineral estate from the surface estate. The mineral deed is recorded. It is a matter of public record. Whatever was sold, and I understand from the county records that your father sold the property for $595,000, they sold only the surface. I unfolded the handwritten note. Grandpa Walt's handwriting, slightly shaky now compared to the ledger entries I remembered from childhood, but the letters pressed hard into the paper as if he wanted them to survive. Megan girl, they'll take the timber. They can't take what's underground. You'll know what to do. I set the note down on the desk. My hands were completely steady. My voice was not. Mr. Burkett, what does this mean legally? He leaned forward. He had been waiting to explain this. In Kentucky, mineral rights constitute a separate estate. They can be owned, transferred, leased, and inherited entirely independently from the surface. When your grandfather filed that mineral deed in November of 2023, he legally severed the subsurface from the surface. 2 estates, 2 owners. When your father sold the property, he sold the surface, the house, the outbuildings, the timber, the pasture, everything above the ground plane. He cannot sell what is not his. The mineral rights were transferred to you 14 months before your grandfather died. They never entered the estate at death. They were already yours. And the affidavit of heirship? James's expression became precise. The affidavit states that your grandfather died without a will. He did not. It states that you relinquished your claim. You did not. Those are false statements in a sworn legal document. The attorney who prepared it, whoever that was, has exposure as well. I sat with that for a moment. Dennis and Sharon had filed a sworn document claiming there was no will. A will existed. They claimed I waived my inheritance. I had never been asked. They sold a property and divided the proceeds. They kept the surface. They never had the subsurface to begin with. What is under the land? I asked. James looked at me, and something shifted in his expression, something that wasn't quite a lawyer's professional composure. Miss Cole, that is your area of expertise, not mine. But your grandfather told me once, and these are his words exactly. The land keeps its own accounts. You just have to learn to read them. I suggest you find out what the accounts say. I drove to the property the next morning. The sold sign stood at the end of the gravel drive. The listing agency's name in red letters. The new owners had not taken possession yet. The house sat empty, windows dark, the barn roof casting a long shadow across the grass. I parked on the county road shoulder and walked the perimeter along the public easement. I did not need to go inside. What I needed was outside and below. I had brought a field kit from my rental car, the same kit I kept in my work truck every Monday morning. Collection vials, a hand auger, a portable refractometer, a soil field log. Except this time it was not for a client. This time the land was mine. I took soil samples from 4 locations. The north timber edge, where the hardwood canopy was densest and the duff was deepest. The creek bank, where the water had cut down through 6 feet of hillside and exposed the stratigraphy like an open book. The southwest corner of the cattle pasture, where the grass grew sparse and pale and the ground had a faintly different color in low morning light. And the center of the property, flat ground, near a survey pin Grandpa Walt had installed himself in the 90s. That southwest corner had always interested him. He would walk out there in the evening sometimes and stand for a while without doing anything, just looking at the ground. Nothing grew quite as well in that patch. The soil dried differently after rain. He had said once, "There's something in that piece I can't put my finger on." The southeast corner sample was notably different in the hand, finer grain, lighter texture, and a faint metallic shimmer in the matrix when I held the vial up to the light. I had seen similar presentations in geological formations associated with gas-bearing sandstone in the Appalachian Basin and in clay-hosted mineral deposits where trace elements were concentrated through long-term subsurface migration. I sealed the vials, labeled them with GPS coordinates, depth, and date. Then I called Priya from the car. "I need you to run these through a full elemental and hydrocarbon trace analysis when they arrive. Flag anything in the gallium, germanium, or natural gas indicator range." Priya's voice shifted. "Megan, what did you find?" I looked out at the 220 acres of timber and pasture and creek. My grandfather's land. My grandfather's gift. "I am not certain yet," I said, but he was. I flew back to Nashville that night. The soil samples went to a certified lab the following morning. For 2 weeks, I worked my standard client load during the day and read Appalachian mineral geology at night. The data existed if you knew where to look. The United States Geological Survey had published regional assessments of the central Appalachian Basin that flagged Pike County and adjacent Floyd County formations for natural gas potential in permeable sandstone layers at depths between 800 and 1,400 feet. A separate set of academic studies from the University of Kentucky's Geological Survey had identified trace gallium concentrations in clay-hosted formations throughout the eastern Kentucky coal fields. Gallium is a byproduct element found in zinc ore and coal seams, and new semiconductor manufacturing demand had made sub-economic deposits suddenly viable. I cross-referenced the geological survey maps against the recorded boundaries of Grandpa Walt's parcel. The southwest corner of the property, the same corner he stood in and studied, sat over a documented gas-bearing formation that three separate USGS technical papers had identified. A man who spent 45 years walking the same 220 acres would not need to read a USGS report to know that something was different about a particular patch of ground. He felt it. He noticed the way the soil compacted differently, the way the creek ran slightly warmer at a particular bend, the way the air above that southwest corner smelled faintly mineral on still mornings in late summer. He did not have a word for what he was noticing. He had a feeling, and he trusted it enough to file a mineral deed. Chad texted me during the second week. "Hey Megan, Mom says you haven't been in touch. Everything okay?" I read the message twice. He was checking on me the way someone checks a locked door, not out of concern, but to confirm the latch is holding. "All good," I replied, just swamped with work. 3 days later, Priya called me at 4 in the afternoon. I was at my desk reviewing an erosion impact report for a county road project in Wilson County. Her voice had that particular quality, the tone someone uses when they are holding a number they know will change the direction of a conversation. "Megan, you need to come over here and look at this in person." Priya had the lab readouts spread across her desk, printed on 4 pages, color-coded by element and compound class. The natural gas indicators were highlighted in orange. The gallium concentration values were highlighted in green. "All 4 sample sites show elevated hydrocarbon trace signatures," she said. "That's consistent with a gas-bearing formation at moderate depth beneath the surface." "But the gallium," Megan, she pointed. "The southwest corner sample. The concentration is not a trace. It is a deposit-level reading." I looked at the numbers. Gallium concentrations in the southwest sample were 4 times the threshold for economically viable extraction under current semiconductor industry pricing. The geological modeling she had run, projecting the concentration gradient across the property based on known formation geometries for this part of the Appalachian Basin, extended the viable zone across nearly 40% of the acreage. How significant? She turned her chair to face me directly. "Conservative estimate using current gallium market pricing, standard recovery rates for clay-hosted deposits, and the natural gas lease value at current Henry Hub pricing. Minimum $3.8 million. If the gallium concentration holds at this level across the southwest formation and the gas column is continuous at depth, you are looking at up to $5.9 million. Midpoint estimate, $4.9 million. I sat down in the chair next to her desk. The soil from the southwest corner of Grandpa Walt's cattle pasture, the same patch he walked out to in the evenings and stood over without being able to explain why, the same patch where the grass never grew quite as green as the rest of the field, was worth $4.9 million. Priya watched me. "Megan, who owns this land now?" "My father sold the surface for $595,000, but the mineral rights belong to me. He severed them. My grandfather, before he died, he gave me a soil testing kit when I was 8 years old and told me the land keeps its own accounts." She was quiet for a moment. "He wasn't just being poetic, was he?" "No," I said. "He was giving me instructions." The next day, I retained a mineral rights attorney in Lexington. Her name was Carol Westfield, and she had spent 27 years handling split estate cases in the Appalachian coalfields and mineral basins of eastern Kentucky. She knew Kentucky mineral law the way I knew soil chemistry, by instinct sharpened by decades of documentation. I sent her everything: the will, the mineral deed, the affidavit of heirship, the lab results, the geological survey analysis, the Pike County recording showing the mineral deed was filed 14 months before my grandfather died. She called me back within 2 hours. "Miss Cole, this is about as clean a mineral severance as I have seen in a long time. Your grandfather executed this correctly. The deed is properly drafted, properly witnessed, properly notarized, properly recorded. The severance predates his death, which means those mineral rights never entered his estate. They were already yours at the moment of his death. The affidavit of heirship has no authority over a pre-death deed transfer. And the false statements in that affidavit are a separate matter entirely. The document states your grandfather died intestate. He did not. It states you relinquished your interest. You did not. At minimum, this is a fraudulent probate filing. The attorney who prepared it carries exposure. She drafted 3 documents. First, a cease and desist letter to Dennis Cole and Sharon Cole regarding the false affidavit of heirship. Second, a formal notification to the ranch buyers that the mineral rights were held separately and belonged to me under recorded deed. Third, preliminary paperwork to open lease negotiations with a natural gas operator and a semiconductor mineral extraction firm. One more question, I said before we wrapped up. I don't want to burn my family to the ground. I want them to understand what they did, and I want the rest of my family to know the truth from me, not from a court filing. Carol paused. Miss Cole, with respect, your father and stepmother did not lose anything here. They never had it. I thought about that after I hung up. She was right. You cannot lose what was never yours. A week later, I opened my social media for the first time in months. Sharon had posted 14 photos, a cabin on Dewey Lake in Johnson County, a wood frame place with a covered deck facing the water. Sharon was standing on the dock in the first photo, arms wide, sunglasses on, smiling with the particular radiance of someone who believes they have gotten away with something clean. The caption read, "Blessed and grateful. Family takes care of family. This is the legacy Grandpa Walt would have wanted." Grandpa Walt, she called him that. The man whose attorney's letter she returned. The man whose cedar box she told me Dennis threw out. The man whose final wishes she worked to erase. Chad had posted too. A new truck, black, lifted, dealer stickers still on the rear window. Caption, "Fresh start, grateful for family." He tagged Sharon in the post. 17 likes, 4 heart reacts, comments from cousins and family friends. So happy for you all. Walt would be so proud. Family first, always. I closed the window. I went to my desk and opened the cedar box. Cedar and old wool and the faint mineral smell of paper that had been in a locked box for over a year. I read the note again. Megan girl, they'll take the timber. They can't take what's underground. You'll know what to do. I had the lab results. I had the will. I had the mineral deed. I had an attorney who had spent nearly 3 decades handling exactly this kind of case in exactly this kind of terrain. I picked up my phone and called Carol Westfield, send the letters. They were posting dock photos and new truck photos while my attorney was printing cease and desist correspondence. If you think this is about to get interesting, you are right. Keep watching. The letters went out on a Tuesday, certified mail, signature required. Sharon signed for hers on Thursday morning at 9:54. I know the exact time because the delivery receipt came back electronically to Carol's office. 51 minutes later, my phone began ringing. Sharon called first. I let it go to voicemail. Dennis called next. Voicemail. Chad called 4 times in 15 minutes. On the 5th call, I picked up. What is this, Megan? His voice was high and tight, the voice of a person who has suddenly discovered the floor under them is not what they thought it was. Some attorney is saying Grandpa left a will, that the mineral rights are yours. What is going on? He left a will, Chad. He left it with his attorney in Prestonsburg, the same attorney Sharon told to stop calling after the funeral. Silence. 5 seconds. Then 10. I didn't know about an attorney. I didn't know about a will. Mom handled all the estate stuff. She told you there was no will and you didn't ask questions. You took the money and bought a truck. More silence. When he spoke again, the bluster was gone. What was left was something more uncomfortable, the sound of a man who has just realized he participated in something without reading the terms. We need to talk about this as a family, Megan. We are family. You signed the sale documents. You took your portion. You knew Sharon said there was no will, and you accepted that without a single question. I didn't know about the false document. I swear I didn't. You didn't know because you didn't ask. It was easier to take the money and say thank you. Talk to my attorney. Her number is on the letter. I hung up and went back to work. Sharon called the following morning at 6:47. I could hear in her voice the particular texture of a night that had not involved sleep, the thin, raw edge of someone who has spent hours calculating how much exposure she is looking at. But she did not start with remorse. She started with the playbook. How could you do this to your father, Megan? After everything he has done for you? He is your father. He has provided for this family his whole life. And this is what you give back? Lawyers and accusations? Sharon, I did not file a false affidavit. You did. Your grandfather was confused at the end. He was 81. That document was notarized 22 months before he died. He drove himself to Prestonsburg. His attorney will testify to his state of mind. You are tearing this family apart over money, Megan. I let that sentence sit in the air between us. There it was, the complete reversal, laid out in under 3 minutes. Deny the validity of the legal document. Frame my response to fraud as a personal attack. Position herself as the victim of my disloyalty. My stepmother had filed a sworn document claiming my grandfather died without a will, intercepted his attorney's certified letter, told that attorney I had no interest in estate matters, and divided the proceeds of a sale without my knowledge. And she was telling me I was the one tearing the family apart. Sharon, I am not tearing anything apart. I am enforcing a legal document that my grandfather filed before he died. We will fight this. Your father and I will fight every bit of this. That is your right. But the mineral deed is filed with Pike County. It has been public record since November of 2023. She hung up without saying goodbye. I noticed she had not denied knowing about the will. She had only called it invalid. That told me everything I needed to confirm. Dennis called 2 days later. His approach was different, softer, slower. The voice he used when Sharon was not in the room and he wanted something without having to explain why. Megan girl. He used the phrase, Grandpa Walt's phrase. It landed exactly where he intended. Hi, Dad. Your stepmother is not doing well. She hasn't been sleeping. She's not eating right. This whole situation, it's taking a real toll on both of us. He paused. Could we just sit down and talk? Just the family, no attorneys, no letters, just talk. Dad, did you know there was a will when you signed the affidavit of heirship? A long pause. I could hear him breathing. The television was on in the background, a weather report. Sharon handled all of that. I just signed where she told me to sign. You signed a document swearing that my grandfather died without a will. You signed a document swearing I had relinquished my rights. Did you read it before you signed? Another pause, longer this time. We needed the money, Megan. The barn roof, Chad's business, Sharon's knee surgery from last year. We couldn't wait months for the court to go through probate. We needed it settled. For one moment, just one, I heard something real in his voice. Not performance, not manipulation, just fatigue. The exhaustion of a man who has been signing things for 30 years and is finally standing in the consequences. Dad, I understand you needed money. I do. But you cannot sell what was never yours. How much is it worth, the mineral stuff? $4.9 million. He did not speak for 26 seconds. Then he hung up. I called James Burkett the following week. James, when does the Cole family typically do its big summer gathering? Labor Day weekend, he said. Same as it has always been. Your grandfather attended everyone going back 30 years. He told me more than once it was the only family obligation he never considered skipping. Where is it this year? From what I understand, at Chad's new place. He bought a house in Pikeville with some of the sale proceeds. I almost laughed. The family Labor Day cookout would be held at a property purchased with money from the sale of a farm, built on a false affidavit, a hidden will, and a decision that I did not count. I want to go, I said. James was quiet for a moment. May I ask your reason? Because my extended family was told two things that are not true. First, that my grandfather left no will. Second, that I wanted nothing from his estate. I need to correct both of those things in front of the people who heard them. You could allow the legal proceedings to accomplish that. A legal proceeding takes months. In the meantime, my Aunt Ruth thinks I walked away from the family. My cousins think Grandpa Walt left nothing behind. The story Dennis and Sharon built is the only story they know. I need to change that narrative before it becomes permanent. James was quiet for a moment. Your grandfather would have respected that. He believed in saying things to people's faces. I called Carol Westfield next. I'll need you on standby the weekend of Labor Day, I said, but I am handling this part myself. She agreed. 3 weeks. That was how long I had to prepare. And unlike the environmental impact presentations I gave to county planning commissions and corporate clients, this one could not be revised after submission. This one was about the truth, and it had one audience and one opportunity. I prepared the way I prepare for a major client presentation, methodically with documentation. I printed 5 copies of each document: the will, the mineral deed, the geological survey report with the $4.9 million valuation, the affidavit of heirship with Dennis and Sharon's signatures next to statements they knew were false. The Pike County Recording Office timestamp showing the mineral deed was filed on November 8, 2023, 14 months before my grandfather died. I organized everything into labeled folders. I highlighted the key sections with yellow marker. I tabbed the pages that mattered most. Priya came to my desk on the Thursday before the weekend. "You are bringing all of that to a Labor Day cookout. It is a family reunion. Megan, you could just let Carol handle this. Carol will handle the court filing, but this part, the family part, that is mine." My grandfather spent decades at those gatherings being told by Dennis and Sharon that his land was not worth what he thought, that he should have sold years ago, that he was stubborn for holding on. I owe it to him to stand in front of his family and show them what that land was actually worth. Priya looked at the cedar box sitting on the corner of my desk. The brass latch was tarnished from decades of use. The wood smelled faintly of old cedar when you lifted the lid. "You're bringing that too?" "That is the most important thing I'm bringing." On Friday evening, I packed everything into a carry-on: documents, folders, the lab report, the cedar box. I drove to the Nashville airport at 5 in the morning. Chad's new house in Pikeville was modest but new, a vinyl-sided colonial on a graded lot at the edge of a development, the kind of house that announces arrival more than it announces permanence. He had strung lights around the back deck. Someone had set up a folding table with a sheet cake that said Cole family in blue frosting. There were 50-odd people, aunts and uncles, second cousins, neighbors from the farm, people who had known Grandpa Walt for 40 years and came because the gathering had always been something he looked forward to. I pulled into the driveway at 1 in the afternoon. I wore slacks and a pressed blouse, not casual, not formal. The outfit of a woman who had come to say something. Sharon saw me first. She was coming out of the side door with a tray of condiments. She stopped on the step. The tray stayed in her hands but went completely still. Dennis rose from a folding chair so quickly it slid back against the deck railing. Chad came across the grass with a beer bottle in his hand. "Didn't know you were coming? Grandpa Walt never missed a Labor Day. Neither will I." The extended family greeted me the way extended family does after too many years of thin contact. Warm, slightly guilty, glad I had made the effort. Aunt Ruth hugged me before I had cleared the gate. She was Grandpa Walt's younger sister, 73 years old, a retired teacher from Pikeville who sent handwritten birthday cards every year without fail. She was the only one who did. She pulled me to the side near the drink table, lowered her voice. "Honey, your stepmother told everyone you'd decided to let the estate go. Said you told her Nashville was your life now, that you didn't want to deal with Kentucky anymore." I looked at my aunt, the one person in this extended family who had kept consistent contact with me for 30 years. She deserved the truth. "That is not quite what happened, Aunt Ruth, but I will get to it." I let 2 hours go by. I helped carry chairs from inside. I ate potato salad. I let people ask me about Nashville and what I did and whether I was seeing anyone. And then, when the afternoon was settling into that slower gear that happens after the main meal, I asked if I could say a few words about Grandpa Walt. Chad had set up a small tribute area near the deck steps, a folding table with a framed photo of Grandpa Walt from a few years before he died, standing in the south timber with a hand on one of the old oaks, a candle in a mason jar next to the photo, the flame going sideways in the breeze. It was the only tribute they had planned. I stood beside the table. 50 faces looked at me. Some were still holding plates. Some were holding cans of sweet tea. The kids had mostly stopped what they were doing. "I want to talk about Grandpa Walt," I said. Most of you knew him as a quiet man who loved that land. That's true, but I want to tell you something about him that most people here probably didn't know. I talked about the summers at the farm, about the way he would crouch down in the field and hold up a handful of dark soil and tell me there was a whole world underneath. About the soil testing kit he gave me when I was 8, the one that started everything for me. About how he drove me to my college orientation in his old Silverado because Dennis and Sharon said it was too far. About how he was the only person in my entire family who ever told me I would be something without adding a qualifier. After Grandpa Walt died, I said my father told me he hadn't left a will. I looked at Dennis. He was standing against the deck railing, arms folded, looking at the ground. My stepmother told me there was nothing for me. They sold the farm for $595,000. A murmur moved through the group. Some of them knew the property had been sold. None of them knew the number. They filed an affidavit of heirship with the Pike County Probate Court. I reached into my folder and held up a copy. That document states, and I have copies here if anyone would like to read it, that I voluntarily relinquished my claim to the estate. I did not. I was never asked. The murmur became silence. I reached into my bag and set the cedar box on the table next to Grandpa Walt's photograph. Grandpa did leave a will. He left it with his attorney in Prestonsburg, a man named James Burkett who served him for 24 years. Mr. Burkett tried to contact me after the funeral. He sent a certified letter to the farm address. My stepmother returned it. I looked at Sharon. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were fixed on the cedar box. Mr. Burkett called the farm's landline. My stepmother told him I had no interest in estate matters. I opened the cedar box. The brass latch clicked. The smell of cedar and old wool moved across the table. Aunt Ruth brought her hand to her mouth. This will was notarized on November 8, 2023, 22 months before Grandpa Walt died. He was fully lucid. He drove himself to Prestonsburg to file it. I held up the document, 9 pages, notarized seal visible to the back of the crowd. The will leaves the surface property, the farmhouse, the outbuildings, the timber acreage, and the cattle pasture to his heirs equally. That includes me. I was not informed. I was not included in the sale. Across the yard, Chad's wife pressed her fingers to her lips. One of the older uncles set his plate on the deck railing and crossed his arms. But the will was not the only thing Grandpa Walt filed that day. He also filed a separate document, a mineral deed. It transferred all mineral rights, all subsurface rights, and all extraction rights beneath those 220 acres to one person. I paused. Me. No one moved. The deck lights strung between the posts swayed slightly in the breeze. I am an environmental consultant, I said. It is what I do for a living. So when I found out the mineral rights were mine, I did what any environmental consultant would do. I tested the soil. I pulled out the geological survey report, 12 pages, bound with a clear plastic cover, the logo of the certified lab in the upper left corner. I took samples from 4 locations on the property. I ran a full elemental and hydrocarbon trace analysis. The results confirmed what my grandfather had suspected for 40 years. I reached into my bag one more time and set a collection vial on the table next to the cedar box. Dark soil from the southwest corner of the cattle pasture, labeled in my handwriting with GPS coordinates and the date I collected it. This dirt, I said, the same dirt Grandpa Walt stood over on summer evenings and said he couldn't put his finger on. It contains natural gas indicator compounds consistent with a viable gas-bearing sandstone formation at depth. And it contains gallium, a rare mineral used in semiconductor manufacturing. The Geological Survey values the combined extractable resources at $4.9 million. The silence was complete. Someone across the yard had turned off the music at some point without anyone noticing. I looked at Sharon. She had gone completely still, arms at her sides. "You told me," I said, "and I remember your exact words. You conveyed through my father that Grandpa didn't leave a will and there was nothing for me." I held the vial at my side. There was. It was underneath the whole time.